Oh, no. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Rebecca Lammers. I am the chair of the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force. For those of you that may not know, the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force is a group of volunteers working on your behalf, working with advocating to Congress about the tax problems that Americans abroad face. So I'll get into that more later, but in the meantime, I wanted to introduce Karen Frankenstein and Betsy Ettore, who are helping us out with moderating. And an extra special welcome to our guest speakers, Ms. Sindhu Chidambaram and Jennifer Hershey from the American Embassy in London. And we have Nathalie Goldstein of MyExpatTaxes.com. So at this point in time, I think I would like to hand it over. Sorry, we need to move through our slides now. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Betsy. I'm going to read this disclaimer and then we'll get right into it. So just want to be clear that Democrats Abroad cannot provide individual tax advice. Advice requires consideration of your individual circumstances and needs, none of which can be done on this webinar. We are not tax lawyers, accountants, or advisors. Please consult a professional tax advisor, accountant, return preparer when addressing your personal tax matters. Democrats Abroad does not endorse or recommend companies or individuals attending or hosting this webinar. The views expressed at this event are those of the respective individuals and companies, not Democrats Abroad. No liability is accepted by Democrats Abroad for the opinions expressed or for any errors or admissions expressed about matters of tax in any country, your financial planning, or your legal obligations. If you are in need of tax advice, you can consult the American Citizens Abroad Tax Return Preparer directory to find an advisor or tax return preparer near you, or providing online services to meet your needs and budget, though buyers always need beware. So now that we have the formality out of the way, can we go to the next slide? We're going to start with talking about registering a birth abroad, then social security numbers, and then we'll do the births and social security number Q&A. We'll then move on to the taxes section of the webinar, and then wrap up with some Democrats Abroad announcements and one post-survey question and the taxes Q&A. So with that, I am now going to, if we could go to the next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Sindhu.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Sindhu, and I'm a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Embassy in London. I work as a consular officer in the Passports and Citizenship Unit at the Embassy, and I will be talking about the Consular Report of Birth Abroad and the process of registering your minor child. The acronym for the Consular Report of Birth Abroad is CRBA, so I'm going to be calling it a CRBA throughout the presentation. I just want to caveat that while the application process is the same worldwide, some parts of the process are unique to the London adjudicating environment, and I will specify when we get to those portions. All right, next slide, please. So what is a CRBA? So any child born outside the United States to a US citizen parent or parents may be eligible for US citizenship if the parents meet certain requirements of transmitting US citizenship under the Immigration and Nationality Act. So the CRBA is a certificate, it's official evidence of US citizenship that we issue to a child under the age of 18. One of the fun facts that I like to say during my interviews is that if the consular officer determines that your child is a natural born US citizen, it is now retroactive to the time of their birth. So they have all the same rights and privileges as anyone born in the United States, and they can run for president. A CRBA should be applied for before the child turns 18. And so here at our embassy in London, we recommend that you apply for the child's CRBA, passport, and social security together, and well in advance of any travel to the United States if you can. And this is really important because if the child is a US citizen or has a claim to US citizenship, they must enter and exit the country, the United States, on their US passport. This comes to be especially relevant if children hold dual citizenships. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides an overview of the process. So the first step is to just check the website of the closest US embassy or consulate for US citizen services. So here in the United Kingdom, we have our embassy in London, as well as consulates in Edinburgh and Belfast. Next, you will review the website for the relevant application forms and supporting documents. Then you'll make an appointment, And on the day of appointment, you're going to be following the security rules to enter the embassy or consulate, which oftentimes is similar to the security screenings at airports. So don't bring large bags, laptops, heavy electronics, things like that. At your appointment, you will meet with the consular officer for the interview, and that officer will make a formal citizenship determination. And then lastly, there's the follow-up. So here in the UK, it takes about 4 weeks for all the documents to come back to you. And that timeline may vary depending on where you're applying. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is very important. So during the CRIBA interview, the consular officer is assessing whether or not you meet the transmission requirements to pass on citizenship to your child. And these requirements are different depending on a variety of factors, including when the child was born, whether there's a non-citizen parent, if the parents were married at the time of the child's birth, and other factors like that. So you can review these transmission requirements on the travel.state.gov website. There's that page, Acquisition of US Citizenship at Birth by a Child Born Abroad. What we'd like to say is if you think your child may have a claim to citizenship, we encourage you to apply. Next slide. So these are the application forms you'll need for your appointment, and they're available on our website. So please do check the embassy website and appointment instructions and make sure to bring in sufficient photocopies of all the supporting documents. And you can find a checklist on our website. Oftentimes the supporting documents include the child's local birth certificate, the parents' passports or IDs, the parents' marriage certificate or divorce decrees, and evidence of physical presence, which I will get into in the next slide, as well as the appropriate fees. It's important to note that all the documents must be originals, and both parents must attend the appointment with the child. If one parent is unable to attend, they can use the consent form, which is the DS 3053, to provide consent for the passport application. And we know that some families just have one parent, or perhaps there's just one parent listed on the birth certificate, and that's okay. We have accommodations for that. And I just want to say for the SS5, the application for the Social Security number, which my colleague Jen will speak about after me, we only accept those in London if the child is under the age of 12 and also applying for a CRIBA at the same time. All right, next slide. So your evidence of physical presence is oftentimes the most crucial part of the citizenship determination process, and therefore must be documented carefully. So I just want to clarify, physical presence is the actual time that the US citizen parent was physically within the United States before the child's birth. So it's not your permanent address, it's not your residence. You can have a residence in the United States, but not be physically there for many parts of a year. So anytime you spend traveling overseas or for vacation would not count. The only exception to that is if you're working with the US government and have military or diplomatic travel orders for your time overseas. And so in order to prove physical presence, some documents that you can provide are education records or transcripts, employment records, medical records, current or expired passports with evidence of travel to the United States, etc. But again, please do document this carefully. And then next slide. All right, and then tips for the interview. So as I mentioned earlier, your physical presence is very crucial. So help us help you by bringing in as much documentation as possible. So really take time when you fill out the DS 2029. And I recommend looking through your old passports and getting the exact dates that you entered and exited the United States, because that's going to help us make sure that we are documenting your children properly. But that's all I have for my presentation, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Sindhu. I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer now to talk about Social Security numbers.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer, and I'm the Regional Technical Advisor for the Federal Benefits Unit at US Embassy London. So the Federal Benefits Unit is also part of the Consular Department, and we're the agency that represents Social Security at embassies abroad. Next slide, please. So when you are registering your child, it's a two-step process. So the first process is what Sindhu was speaking of, where you confirm citizenship and apply for the CRIBA and passport. And the second process is actually with Social Security to have the SSN or the Social Security number issued. So Social Security does not make citizenship determinations. So we need the other agency first to confirm that you're a US citizen or your child's a US citizen before we can issue a number. So if you're rushing through this process, you need the number for tax returns, et cetera, you must do it in order. You have to go to them first before you can come to us for the number. So this slide has the list of documentation required for a first-time Social Security number application. So that's Form SS5, application for an SSN. And this form can be found on the Social Security website, which is ssa.gov, or it's also linked on our embassy website. You can also find it just by Googling the name. You need 2 ID documents for the child, one that proves citizenship and one that proves identity. In general, usually this is the US passport and CRIBA, could be also a foreign birth certificate if you're in a country where we accept those documents. But if you've already been to the passport, through the passport application, and you have those 2 documents, that's the easiest ones. We also need a photo ID for the parent who's signing the application. In most cases, this would be the US citizen parent. Next slide, please. So the London Embassy process for under 12s is slightly different because we have an integrated process where we work with the passport unit. So in this context, when we're speaking, child is anyone under the age of 12, because for Social Security applications for a number, for a newborn to age 11, there is no face-to-face interview required. So that process can be done entirely through the mail. In London, we are helped out by the passport department. So that when someone goes in to register their child, they also take in the SS5. And when they have issued the passport and the CRIBA, they will then hand copies of those along with the parents' documents over to our office so that we can then process the SSN. So this does mean there's a slight delay in between when you get the passport and CRIBA and when you get the SSN, because at the time you're receiving those documents, our office is as well. So we will then process the number, and that is then actually issued from the US office where they will mail you the card. Currently in the Embassy London, we have about 6 to 8 weeks on these applications. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Okay, so okay, so for other countries, for children under 12, it can be slightly different depending on where you are. As Sindhu said, this process varies from embassy to embassy depending on what they have set up. So you really do need to contact your embassy or consulate in the country that you're resident in to get exact information. Under 12s can be done through the mail, and that's true worldwide. If you are in Edinburgh or Belfast, you're covered by us here in London, and we would recommend you send it by Royal Mail, registered delivery. We will send documents back the same way. We don't hold documents while we're processing an application, so you will get the passports and everything back very quickly. If you are in a country where you have a federal benefits unit in the same embassy, then you can speak to them directly. So, there are many European embassies that have federal benefits units. So that would be, Paris, Frankfurt, Rome, and you can check the embassy website and it will let you know if there's one located there. If you have a country where there is not an FBU in the building, there will be a federal benefits unit who is your servicing unit. So for instance, here in London, we also represent Bermuda and many African countries. So if someone in one of those countries needs to apply for a Social Security number, we will coordinate with the consular department in that building. In general, we don't recommend, people mailing documents from country to country. So there is also the option for a no-fee certification, and these should be available from American Citizen Services at your local consulate or embassy. They will then give you the certified documents, and you can mail those to us or your servicing FBU along with your application to have the Social Security number processed. Next slide, please. So if the child is over the age of 12, it gets a little trickier. If a person is over 12 and has never had a Social Security number, they have to appear in person at a US consulate or embassy for a face-to-face interview. And the reason for that is if you're a US citizen and you're living in the US, it's very, very rare that you would reach the age of 12 with no social security number. So for SSA, this is a big red flag. It's an indication that there might be identity theft or fraud involved. And so there's an extra level of scrutiny for any person applying for a first-time SSN over the age of 12. And we are not exempt from that just because we're resident abroad. So these face-to-face interviews can be conducted at a federal benefits unit or at an embassy or consulate if there's no FBU in the building. So they would be done by other consular staff who would then pass the interview information and the certified documents onto the federal benefits unit that covers that area. Beware, because if your child was born in the US, there might be more additional documentation required to show the foreign residence, because especially if they're a young child, it's very unlikely they wouldn't have been issued a social security number. And if you're not sure if your child does have a social security number, you just need to contact your servicing FBU and they can check that for you using their name and date of birth. If you do need an interview with the federal benefits unit in London for a child or adult over the age of 12, we're currently booking about 3 to 4 weeks in the future for these types of appointments. Next slide, please. So these are some links to help you out. The first one is the US Embassy website with our general information about Social Security number. It's an overview of documents and basic information about the process. This is also helpful if you have a situation I didn't cover today, such as an adult application or a name change. You can contact our unit by email on the email address there, or we can also have phone lines that are open Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays between 10 to 1. Or of course, you can also send us physical mail. If you aren't located in the United Kingdom and you want to figure out who your servicing federal benefits unit is, then there's the link for the list of, from the Social Security website, for the list of foreign SSA offices. This will let you know country by country which federal benefits unit service which places. This information is also listed on your consular embassy website. So if you just check the embassy or consulate website of your country, follow American Citizen Services and then Social Security Administration, it will link you to the federal benefits unit in the country that is connected to yours. And I think that's all I have. So we can open it up for questions for Sindhu and myself.
Great, thank you so much. Betsy, could you go to the next slide? So now is the time for you to submit any additional questions that you may have on submitting or registering a birth abroad or obtaining a social security number. I'm going to go ahead and ask some of the most frequently questions that I get. Does a parent have to register their child's birth abroad for that child to obtain American citizenship?
So we encourage, yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So we encourage you to go through the CRIBA process to get that official certificate to register your child abroad. Is it a requirement? So if your child is over 18, then they are just going to apply for a first-time passport. So there are other ways to acquire citizenship. But we just suggest that the CRIBA is the best evidence to use to register your child abroad.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a question along those lines. Someone's asked, does both parents need to be citizens, I'm assuming, to obtain US citizenship? Is the proof of presence since 18 years old or of the last few years?
So yeah, great question. So there are different transmission requirements. So sometimes we see families where there's one US citizen parent and one non-citizen parent, and there are still ways to transmit citizenship. Physical presence is any time that you've spent in the United States from your birth until your child's birth. So any time before your child's birth would count towards that, the physical presence requirement.
And just to kind of follow up on that, there's somebody asking, when a Kenyan who became a US citizen has a child born in Kenya afterwards, can that child become a US citizen?
Absolutely, and that parent's physical presence would count even before they became a citizen. So let's say this Kenyan citizen parent became a citizen at age 20. If they've been in the United States since age 10, that time would still count. It doesn't matter if they were a citizen at the time. It just matters when they were in the United States.
Right. If one of the parents is a US citizen, why is it necessary to prove physical presence in the US prior to birth for the child to be granted citizenship?
So that goes back to the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so there are just, very firm transmission requirements that you're welcome to read up on travel.state.gov, but that's just how the law is written right now.
Okay. And is there any special proof forms or proof needed if the child was born via IVF in the UK, where non-US citizen parents, not technically biological parents, are born via sperm donor? Very specific question, but listed as parent on the birth certificate. The form from CRIBA talks about biological parent.
Yeah, so that's a very unique circumstance. So I'd recommend reaching out to the closest embassy or consulate near you to just get more information on that. I can't speak to that specific circumstance, but there are ways to transmit citizenship through IVF and other forms of birth.
And is there anything being done to provide more interview times in London? Somebody said they've tried to schedule an interview via the website for the last 10 months.
Yeah, and I hear your frustration. So we are now at maximum capacity. We're doing more interviews than we did pre-COVID. And so this is a top priority for our embassy and for our consular section. And we're putting a lot of resources into just getting American citizens documented. So we're doing our best. And right now I've been able to see children who are a few weeks old. And so appointments are available. And I just recommend checking the website every day to see if you can schedule one.
And what offices accept foreign birth certificates? My local FBU in Frankfurt does not accept phone calls and does not answer emails.
So documentation wise, Germany should be fine for a foreign birth certificate, but it really varies country to country. So you can check on the SSA website under accepted documentation. But in general, I would just recommend a US passport and a CRIBA, and then you circumvent that necessity.
Okay, and just for further clarification, for a child under the age of 12, the application process for the Social Security number, can it be done via mail, or is it depending on your location or country?
Worldwide, it can be done by mail. So the only requirement for the face-to-face interview is 12 and above. So if they're under that, you can always mail documentation anywhere. And that rule wouldn't change depending on like a local unit or anything like that. That's an SSA requirement for the number itself.
And then another question, will my child's ability to pass on American citizenship be contingent on how much time they have spent or lived on US soil, or how many years or physical presence or residency is required to transmit citizenship to my future grandchildren?
So that's actually a great question. We get that a lot. So it really depends. So if your child, if you have a grandchild with 2 US citizen parents, then they would just need prior residence in the United States. The physical presence really comes into play when one of the parents is not a US citizen. And so it really depends for your future grandchildren, really depends on who your child ends up partnering up with and their citizenship. So again, review the Immigration and Nationality Act transmission requirements on the website, and you'll get to see the different requirements dependent on the different combinations of parents.
And just to clarify, it looks like this is, what are the requirements for physical presence? Example, the number of years, just to be clear for the parent.
Right, so it really depends. So it depends on when the child was born. Mostly we're seeing children who are born in the past 20, 30 years. And so, well, actually the past 18 years, because we're doing CRIBA. So at that point, if one parent is a US citizen and the other parent is a non-citizen, they need to prove 5 years physical presence in the United States total. And at least 2 of those 5 years have to be after the age of 14.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. This is really helpful. There's a big conversation going on about how long it's taking to receive a Social Security card once registered. Is there anything you can comment on in terms of processing time and in terms of actually obtaining the Social Security card?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to comment on anywhere other than US Embassy London, because this will really vary on the unit and what their backlog is. I know some countries are maybe working farther back than others at the moment. I know that we're currently processing applications from the end of January, beginning of February, which so that's our timeline in London. And when we process it, the card usually takes about, for the UK, maybe 2 weeks max to be mailed from the US office. Usually quite often just a week. But I have no idea what other FBU workloads look like, and I wouldn't want to comment on it. I know it is a priority workload at the moment because we're aware that people are concerned for tax season and the upcoming, foreign tax deadline in June. We're aware of it.
Okay. And another question, can one interview serve for the application of 2 children?
No, so you will need to schedule 2 appointments each child needs their own appointment.
Okay. Once a child has the social security number and passport, is there any other issues that need to be covered?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So I'm just reading how it's written. Once a child has the social security number and passport, is there any other issues that need to be covered? I'm guessing they mean, is there anything else that needs to be done for that child in terms of registering them?
Once they have a US passport, they are registered as a US citizen.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. I'm going to do 1 or 2 more, and then I think we're going to move on. If I did not send my 2 ID documents for my child, how do I remedy this issue? I only sent my passport card and my baby's cribba. I could not send passports because I needed them for, it looks like, for travel. So what do you recommend in that case where not all of the documents were submitted with the application?
Again, hard to comment on an office in another country. Here in the UK, if we receive an application that's missing a document, we would contact the person and we would hold the application, send you back your documents and contact you saying, we're missing this one piece, please can you send it in? We would just add it to the application. But I don't know what other, that may vary office to office. I mean, I'd recommend emailing the office involved and just, explaining what you sent, and then they should be able to pull the application and deal with it.
Okay. And the last question is, am I correct in understanding that American grandparents can provide the residency requirement for their grandchildren's US citizenship?
So that's a great question. So for the purposes of a consular report of birth for the CRIBA, no, but there are other ways for your child to become a US citizen. So I would check the Child Citizenship Act, and that's where there are caveats for grandparents to supplement the physical presence time in the United States. Okay. And that would be something that you go through a separate route. You wouldn't do that through the embassy and through the passports and citizenship unit.
Okay. And oh, sorry, one last really good question. Does the interview include both the parent and the child?
Yes, so we need to see both parents and definitely the child. But if one parent is unable to make it, we can issue a CRIBA with just one parent at the interview. The passport needs both parents' consent. And so if one parent isn't physically able to be at the interview, they can provide a consent form, which is the DS 3053.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This was really super helpful. I really appreciate your time and waking up so early to join us on a webinar. Yeah, thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm now going to hand it over to Nathalie, who's now going to talk about the tax part of this. And again, what I recommend that you do is hold off on your tax questions, hold off on submitting your tax questions until after the tax presentation. And then once we get to the end, I will let you know when you can submit your questions. But also the other thing is that once we do get to the Q&A, you can also upvote on questions that you like. So you can look through the questions that have been submitted and then click upvote on questions that you like. And then what we'll do when we get to the tax Q&A is we'll start with the questions at the top and work our way down. So be sure to be looking at the questions that have been submitted and upvote on questions that you like, so that we're not seeing any repeat questions and we can use the Q&A time as efficiently as possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nathalie. Thanks, Nathalie.
Of course. Hi, everyone. So now the burning question of how much money can you get on your tax return for your children that have Social Security numbers? Before I start, I know tax is a very complex topic. So of course, I'll try to get to any questions and information in this presentation. It is short, 15 minutes. So if you have questions, you can always reach out to MyExpatTaxes. We did build MyExpatTaxes for US expats, right? Because if you use online services based in the US, it doesn't really cover your situation. And that's what MyExpatTaxes is there for. Whether you are on, a little bit more price sensitive, you want to do it yourself, we offer that. If you want to work with a tax professional directly, have a video call, we also offer that. So again, if you're struggling about US taxes, MyExpatTaxes is a great resource, whether you just look at it for free resources or you actually go through for the paid services. So before we jump really into everything, I want to kind of touch on who needs to file a US tax return, right? We're talking about US citizenship, Social Security numbers, what really triggers US tax returns and that filing requirement. So I want to point to the fact that if you look in the back of your passport, right, just flip to the back at one point, you will actually see a section there that says, if you're a US citizen, you have to file a US tax return if you meet certain filing requirements. And that's simply it. If you're a US citizen, if you're a US green card holder, because they are also held by the same standards, and you pass the filing requirements, which are listed on the screen, remember that filing requirements do change every year based on inflation and whatever the tax regulations are at that point. The main thing is if your worldwide income, which is considering any foreign source income, any US income, whether it's salary, rental, investment, pension, Social Security benefits, some type of government income, et cetera, all of this is considered your gross income, so before taxes and deductions. And if you're over the filing threshold for that year, for what you're filing as and what your age is, then you need to file a US tax return. So one thing I want to call out, because of course you can see the numbers on the screen, is if you're married filing separately, which is a lot for expats, because essentially you're married to a non-US citizen. And say that you don't qualify for the head of household because maybe you don't have a US citizen dependent and or you don't pay for more than half of the cost of the home. Most of the time you're filing as married filing separately. And that filing threshold is unfortunately only $5. And it's not a typo, it was changed in 2018 and it stayed that way since. So again, if you meet these filing thresholds, when you count all of your money, so any income you get from the UK, from Australia, from the US, etc., worldwide income, all sources of income, so salary, self-employment, pension, et cetera, before taxes and deductions, if you pass over these filing thresholds, you need to file a US tax return. Now, one more thing I want to call out that's not on the screen is if you're self-employed. If you're self-employed or you have self-employment income and you have over $400 in self-employment net profit, you also need to file a tax return regardless of the filing requirements on screen, because the US needs to assess if you will be subject to US self-employment tax or not. Now, with that being said, a question I get a lot is, how old does my child have to be before they start filing US tax returns? Again, it's not necessarily based on age. While age does factor in a little bit on the filing requirements, for example, if your children have a lot of unearned income or if you're 65 or over, the filing requirements will change slightly, but it's really not about age. So if your child turns 18, but they don't make any income, they don't need to file a US tax return. If your child turns 20 and they don't make any income, they don't need to file a US tax return. If you are 50 and you don't make any income, you don't need to file a US tax return. So it's not necessarily about age, it's about how much money do you earn in a year from all sources abroad, the US, from really all different sources of income. So any pension income, Social Security, etc. I cannot stress that enough, because a lot of people think that it's only about US sourced income and it's about worldwide income. So that is a little bit preference on who needs to file a US tax return. Again, if I said that and you're sitting on the other side of the screen and you're really nervous, please don't be nervous. If you haven't been filing and you need to file, we'll talk about how to remedy that situation. And then we'll also talk about kind of the benefits of filing, because it's not all bad. It's not all bad when you're filing a US tax return. So one of the reasons for that is the child tax credit. Of course, you've probably heard about the stimulus payments, and that's not really in scope for this webinar, but just a heads up that the stimulus payments probably brought a lot of attention to US filings, because you realize you could get a refund on your US tax return, even if you have no US source income and you pay no US income tax. Well, the child tax credit also functions the same way. And even if you have no US source income, you pay no US income tax. If you have a child that has US citizenship, they have a social security number, and you're eligible, you might be able to get a refund every single year. Despite the pandemic or not, this is an ongoing refund. So a little bit about the child tax credit, because you'll hear about this a lot. It's comprised of essentially two layers. There's the child tax credit, which is normally a larger sum of money. So this year it's $3,000 to $3,600. And that amount of money first will lower your US tax bill. So that first layer of the child tax credit is a non-refundable credit. So what it does is if you have any US taxes owed, it will directly go against your US taxes owed and lower that amount owed. Now, the second layer of the child tax credit is once referred to as the additional child tax credit, which was a little misleading because you don't need an additional child, right? It's just really the refundable portion of the child tax credit. So they renamed it this year, so it's a little bit more easy to understand. But that's the second layer. So normally this is a smaller piece of the child tax credit. As I mentioned, the larger piece this year, the non-refundable portion is $3,000 to $3,600 based on the age of your child. While the second layer, which is usually a smaller piece, is about $1,400 for most expats, but can be up to the full $3,000 to $3,600 if you qualify as an expat that had a home in the US for the majority of 2021. But regardless, for most expats, you're looking at a smaller portion of that child tax credit as the refundable amount. So how much are the credits and the refunds? It really depends on what year we're talking about. And I think that's the nice thing is if you haven't, been putting your child on your US tax return because you didn't think there was any reason to do so, if you haven't gotten a social security number yet for your child, the refunds are not lost. So of course, I'll talk about that. You do need a social security number by the due date of your tax return. But if you had a social security number for your child already and you just simply didn't claim the refunds, or you claimed your tax return in a way where you didn't get the refund, you can still get prior refunds. So right now the refund still on the table is 2018 to 2020 prior years, and of course 2021, which is the current year. For 2018 to 2020, any qualifying dependent, so child under the age of 17, so they were under 17 by December 31st of that tax year, the non-refundable layer was $2,000. And the refundable layer for everyone, right, whether you were in the US or you were abroad, is $1,400. Now for 2021, it's changed a little bit. So qualifying dependent is a child under the age of 18 by December 31st of that year. So if your child was under the age of 18 on December 31st, 2021, then the non-refundable layer for that child is anywhere between $3,000 to $3,600. $3,000 being if your child is 6 and over, $3,600 is your child is under the age of 6. And the refundable second layer for the majority of expats still stays at $1,400. However, if you did have a main home in the US for the majority of 2021, say you moved abroad mid-year, or you're on a very temporary work contract for 6 months or so, and that's why you're abroad for a little bit in 2021, or you're a military family and you were stationed abroad, you can still get the full refundable portion, which this year is the same as the non-refundable, $3,000 to $3,600 per child. So it is quite a lot of money. And again, if you haven't been filing tax returns, but you could claim your child, you will get all of these refunds if you're eligible for them. So it can really be a lot, especially when you combine it with the stimulus payments. So there are, of course, some requirements, right? So the first part is there is a minimum income required. So in order to get the additional child tax credit, right, I'm only talking about the refundable portion, you will need more than $2,500 of earned income, right? So there is this minimum threshold. And essentially earned income is worldwide wages and US self-employment income or foreign self-employment income that's not exempt from self-employment tax. So that is important to know, because if you are using a totalization treaty so that you don't have to pay self-employment tax on your foreign self-employment income, that does not count as earned income in regards to getting the refundable child tax credit. Now, a lot of times you may think, should you forego the totalization treaty in order to claim the additional child tax credit? Normally your tax bill will be higher. You'll end up owing money if you do so because of the way the rates are. So self-employment tax is 15.3% approximately, while the refundable child tax credit is a little bit lower at 15%. So it works in a way where most of the time you won't get a refund if you do this. It really depends on your tax situation. However, maybe you want to contribute to your Social Security benefits account and still pay self-employment tax. So it really depends on your unique situation, but essentially if you're claiming the totalization treaty and your only income is self-employment income, then unfortunately, that doesn't count as the earned income requirement. Now, I do want to call out that if you had earned less during the pandemic, you can actually use your 2019 earned income on your 2020 tax return for your child tax credit. So that is something you can do. That was really a one-time change that was allowed. And of course, there's a minimum income requirement. There's also a maximum income requirement. So if your adjusted gross income is over those limits on the screen, then your refundable portion will be phased out down to 0. So of course, those requirements are quite high over there. So I think a lot of expats will still be eligible. And if you're curious on why all these numbers are the way they are, there is a general calculation for how the refundable child tax credit works. It's your earned income minus that minimum income threshold, so $2,500 times 15%, and that is the refundable portion of the child tax credit up to the maximum amount of $1,400 per child, or again, if you had a main home in the US in 2021 for the majority of the year, it can be up to $3,600. So why or what kind of dependent is eligible for the child tax credits? Well, the first thing is they have to be a dependent on your tax return. Your child needs to be eligible as your dependent. So they need to be living with you for more than half the year. They need to not have been paying their own, more than half of their own financial support. I get this question a lot. So especially for, parents that just have children, perhaps they go on paternity leave during the year, they're not working, but maybe their non-resident alien spouse is working, and they think that they cannot claim that dependent on their tax return because they themselves didn't work, but their non-resident alien spouse was the one that was providing financial support. If you are married, if you're in the same home, and just because you're on paternity leave doesn't mean that you cannot claim your child as dependent. So I want to call that out. Now, of course, as we've been talking about, your child needs to have a valid US Social Security number by the due date of your return. Normally, every tax year for an expat the due date is June 15th. Of course, this has been changing a bit with the pandemic, but for this year, it's June 15th. You can extend all the way to December 15th. So that is very important. If you're going through the Social Security process, if you are waiting for your Social Security card, and again, as Jennifer pointed out, it can be fast if you're in a certain unit that it has, not a huge backload, but if you're working with a unit that maybe has a larger backload, maybe the waiting time is longer. When I went through the process personally, it was about 3 months, after I got the US passport, that I got the Social Security number. So if you think that you're not going to get it by June 15th, file an extension, file a free extension to October 15th. You can do that via MyExpatTaxes right away without even paying. You can go file Form 4868, paper mail it, although if you paper mail, it might not get processed in time, but it shouldn't matter because as long as you paper mailed it, or you can go to irs.gov/payments and pay $1 extension payment, and you will get an extension to October 15th. That buys you more time to get your Social Security number for your child. And if you need to, you can extend all the way to December 15th after the October 15th deadline. So by the October 15th deadline, if you send a letter to the IRS requesting a personal exemption to December 15th. So just a heads up, if you're nervous about the processing time, there are things you can do to buy yourself more time. So again, in my personal experience, it was about a 3-month processing time. As Jennifer mentioned, it can be less depending on the unit you're working with. But one more thing I want to call out is a lot of parents are reluctant to get a Social Security number for their child because they think that a Social Security number means that their child will be subject to US tax. It's not about a Social Security number. It's about citizenship. If you're already going to give citizenship to your child, please get them a Social Security number before they turn 12, as you saw that it gets a lot harder when they're older. And so you're doing them a favor by just getting everything done ahead of time. And plus you'll get the refunds. And one day when they have to file US tax returns because they're a US citizen, they already have a Social Security number and they don't have to go through this face-to-face interview process. So the other part is your child under the age threshold? So of course, you can claim them as a dependent. Those age thresholds are a little bit higher. However, for the child tax credit, it's under 17 for 2018 to 2020, under 18 for 2021. So that is, how to claim a child and if they're eligible. One thing I want to call out that I won't talk too much about is just the child and dependent care credit. You can get another non-refundable credit if you are paying childcare expenses. So just a heads up, it's a little bit harder to claim, right? You can't be married filing separately. Both parents should be working, and you can't really have schooling costs involved, and it's not refundable if you're an expat for the full year. It is refundable for 2021 if you had a home in the US majority of 2021. So heads up there. But this is another credit that goes with children, but it's normally non-refundable. And to be honest, most expats don't really necessarily need this credit unless perhaps they have US sourced income. So want to call out the major changes that happened, this year for your 2021 tax return. We're always working in the year behind. Did you have a main home in the US for more than half of 2021? So really having a main home is about where you decide you're domiciled, right? Where are you really domiciled? So if you are temporarily away on a short-term work contract, right? So you're moving abroad for a 6-month work contract, maybe it's a year, but you intend to go back to the US, your main home is in the US, everything's still in the US, you can certify that you have a main home in the US. And that means that you do get the larger refundable amounts for the child tax credit, the child and dependent care credit, etc. If you're a US military personnel that's stationed outside the US for an extended time, you're still considered to have a main home in the US. So just a heads up there that it's important that you understand this, that in the event that you are eligible, even if you were abroad for the majority of 2021, that you can still get the expanded amounts, right? So you're not just kind of stuck with what expats get, the $1,400 per child. So that is really the major change that happened for your 2021 tax return. So when you're filing Schedule 8812, if you're doing it yourself, you'll see a checkbox that says, do you certify that you were in the US and you had a main home in the US for the majority of 2021? So just a heads up that there are some exceptions, even if you weren't physically there for the majority of 2021. Of course, if you're going through MyExpatTaxes, we make it really easy and we figure out if we can check that box for you or not. If you're using any other tax provider, they should be going through the same process to make sure they know if you're eligible or not eligible for the expanded amounts. So as Rebecca kind of mentioned in the beginning, did anyone have to pay back their advanced child tax credit payments? Everyone said no, which I was really surprised at, because I've seen already to this day a lot of parents having to pay this back. So what I do hope is that if you got advanced child tax credits, that you are planning ahead, because this is a situation that can happen, and this happens to me, right? So I'm also a US taxpayer. I got advanced child tax credit payments. I have one daughter and I got $1,800. But I'm only eligible for $1,400 because I'm an expat. I've been an expat all for 2021. So I actually will owe the IRS back $400. And while that sounds, a little stressful because you have to pay the IRS something, keep in mind they already deposited $1,800 into my account. And so it's just paying back the access amounts. I still got the $1,400 and then I even got it in advance, right? But that is something to note. So if you got some payments from the IRS, maybe you're not exactly sure what they were, especially if the amounts look like $1,800, you should have gotten a letter 6419 to summarize those amounts. There are other ways to check this. You can check it online. You can call the IRS. In MyExpatTaxes, when we ask you about this, we give you all the different ways you can check how much you got. But essentially, you should look for this letter. It will tell you how much you got, and it will help you file your tax return for 2021. And it is quite common at this point, especially if you got $1,800 for a child, that you will be paying back some amount of that because you're only eligible for $1,400 for that child. So you need to pay that back by the payment deadline. I know that expats don't have to file until June 15, but that's about filing. That's not about paying. If you owe taxes, you should still try to pay at least an extension payment by April 18 to avoid any interest or penalties on that. So if you're unsure today, if you're kind of nervous, I do offer that in MyExpatTaxes, you can go in, you can fill out your information before you even have to pay, right? You will see an estimated taxes owed or refund amount. And that way you can just have a heads up of, do you think you might have to pay? And then, of course, that's completely free until you decide you want to file with us. So that's kind of our resource to help you decide how to handle this so you don't get a shock on June 15th or later in the year. So again, I know a lot of people in this webinar were not affected by that, but if you're not sure, if you didn't file your tax return yet, it might happen if you got advanced child tax credit payments. It's happened to me, it's happened to a lot of expats. So now you're probably thinking, I've been filing US tax returns. I've had my children on my US tax return. They have social security numbers. I meet those income thresholds. I never got this refund. Well, that's probably because you have Form 2555 in your tax return. So the foreigner and income exclusion, FEIE, I will brush on this, and I know it's a deeper topic, but it is a very common expat tax benefit. And unfortunately, if you go through any US-based tax software, right, the really popular ones, if you go through most US tax firms, even if they say they specialize in expats, most of the time they'll just stick 2555 in your tax return, even if it might not be the most optimal for you because it's the expat tax form, but it's not a required form for expats. You don't need to use Form 2555. You can always use the foreign tax credit approach, which is 1116. And if you use Form 2555, then you are not eligible for the refundable child tax credits. Of course, you might use it because if you have a higher adjusted gross income, which I highlight on the screen, you might have used it to lower your adjusted gross income for the stimulus payments. However, it does make you ineligible for the refundable child tax credit. So if you're wondering why you never got this credit, look in your tax return for Form 2555. Now, if you're thinking, oh, that's what I did, how do I fix this? Again, you can always amend back to 2018. Those refunds are still on the table. And the people that should look into amending their tax return to claim the additional child tax credit is anyone that lives in a high income tax country. So the UK being one of those, right? Most of the countries in the EU being that, and a couple countries, sprinkled around there, it actually is a lot more beneficial to have the foreign tax credit. It helps you build up a carryover of foreign tax credits to offset income later on, and it helps you be eligible for the refundable child tax credit. So if you're unsure, what I can also offer, we do this after every webinar, is you can always go to MyExpatTaxes, reach out to us, team at MyExpatTaxes, just, we'll have a secure portal. You can upload your prior year tax return, and me or someone else on the team would just take a quick look and say, hey, maybe you would have been eligible for the additional child tax credit. You can look to amend it, or we say, actually, the way you did it was perfect. There was no other refund you could have gotten, so don't worry about it. But if you're wondering why you didn't get the additional child tax credit, it's probably because of Form 2555. So just a heads up there, it's really important to understand what's being filed in your tax return and making sure that you have an optimal tax return. So another thing that's not necessary to the child tax credits, but a question I get a lot is how to report your child's assets. So just a heads up, if you are opening up bank accounts for your child, foreign financial accounts, you're saving up for your child, you're giving them investment accounts, et cetera, they may have to file their own FBAR in the rare event that the combined max balance of all their foreign financial accounts is over $10,000. So they would have to file their own FBAR. Of course, you need to include any of your child's accounts on your own FBAR if you have signature authority on it. So again, not really the scope of this webinar, but a heads up for all of you out there, if you're opening up foreign financial accounts for your child, to anticipate for them, to help save for them, that's amazing thing that you're doing. Just be aware that you have to include their accounts on your FBAR if you have signature authority on them. And if they actually do reach the filing threshold, they have to file their own FBAR. Right. So it is, a lot of reporting, but unfortunately, just part of that process. If you're nervous about it, there is a delinquent FBAR submission process if needed. Most of the time it's not needed, but there are possibilities. So again, if you're ever nervous because you think you haven't been compliant or etc., please don't be. There are ways to remedy the situation. You just have to be educated and know what steps to take. Again, if your child has unearned income over $1,100, it's time to take a little bit of a closer look if they have to report that income on your tax return, if they have to file their own tax return. And otherwise, if they don't have unearned income over that limit, then you just have to look at their total gross income for the filing threshold. And as long as they're not making over $12,550 in 2021 as a single filer, they don't have to file a tax return. So with that being said, if you haven't been filing, if you needed to file, if you think I should have been filing to get the child tax credits and all of those refunds associated, you can always go through the streamlined procedure. It's an amnesty program from the IRS. Even if you haven't filed for 10, 20, 30 years, etc., you only need 3 back years of taxes. You only need 6 back years of FBAR, so these foreign bank account reports, and you will most likely get a refund, right? Because if you have dependent children, if you're eligible for the child tax credit, if you're eligible for the stimulus payments, you will probably get refunds. And the really cool thing is, if you don't pay the IRS on time, they will charge you interest. If the IRS doesn't pay you on time, they will pay you interest. So that is definitely a possibility there. So I have seen people that have come in so nervous that they have been filing, they're scared that they're going to go to jail, which honestly, you're most likely not. I don't think that would ever be such an extreme case that would happen, but it's important to be compliant. They go through the streamlined procedure and they're getting thousands back in refunds because of the child tax credits, because of the stimulus payments, and then interest on top from the IRS. So it's not all bad is what I'm saying. Please don't think about filing a US tax return as, a terrible thing. It can be a good thing, especially if you have children with social security numbers and you're eligible for the additional child tax credit. Even if not, there are the stimulus payments. So if you look around, it is quite expensive to file the streamlined procedure because it's a lot of different years. We try to make it more affordable in MyExpatTaxes. So we do offer that with under 1,000, and you can do it all yourself. You can file for all these years at once. Just be a heads up there. You do have to paper mail these returns, so it will take longer to be processed. You have to paper mail streamlined returns, but you can always e-file your 2021 tax return to get this third stimulus payment and the child tax credit ASAP. So, try to e-file your 2021 tax return. A lot of US-based tax offers don't let you e-file as an expat, so just make sure whatever service you use that you will be able to e-file, because that will make life a lot easier in terms of getting refunds. And, I will answer questions at the very end. I'm sure I probably already went over, so Rebecca, you'll have to jump in after this. But if I don't get to your questions at the end of this portion, we do have a Facebook group. You can join it. It's free, and we are always there. Basically, our main goal is to get you the education you need, because whether or not you file with us, the most important thing is that you are compliant and you know what you're eligible for and you don't miss out on refunds. All right, Rebecca, please come back on.
Okay, so thank you so much, Natalie. I know that's a lot of information for people to take in. We do have a hard stop in about 20 minutes, so I want to make sure that we do get to your questions. So please, at this point in time, submit your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and be sure to upvote on the questions that you want answered the most. I'm just going to take a few minutes out to do our Democrats Abroad public service announcement, and then we will get into your questions. So just a few things while you're submitting your questions. So I mentioned earlier that I'm the chair of the Taxation Task Force within Democrats Abroad. Essentially, we're a group of volunteers where we're helping and advocating on behalf of Americans abroad to US Congress. A lot of our policies that we have in place include switching to residency-based taxation, so you don't have to double file in your country as well as with the US, or be subject to double taxation in the country that you live in as well as in the US, because we believe that that is unfair. We also talk about eliminating the FATCA reporting of foreign accounts for Americans abroad, and exempting small American business owners abroad from the GILTI and the transition taxes. And a big issue for seniors is they get a lot of their Social Security reduced due to the windfall elimination provision. So there's a lot more information about this on our website. You can go check it out as you can. Next slide. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we do tax events regularly. A lot of people ask us, why does Democrats Abroad do tax events? And the reason is because of the tax problems that Americans abroad face. And a lot of people view taxes as a barrier to voting. And we really want everyone to vote. So that is why we do these tax education events, so that people know that taxes are not a barrier to voting and engaging in US elections. But for more information, you can see on the screen here that we have a lot of other events happening somewhere near you coming up. And if you'd like to be notified about any new tax events happening in the future, you can sign up to the tax mailing list. Just go to democratsabroad.org/taxation. Next slide. So what can you do? So the number one thing that you can do in order to help us with advocating for a switch to residency-based taxation, changing the tax laws to make them fairer for Americans abroad, is to vote. The reason for that is because not enough Americans abroad vote. And when we don't vote, then Congress doesn't know that we exist, and then they don't know to prioritize our issues. And so this year in particular, 2022, is the midterm election. Historically, people don't tend to vote in midterm elections, but this year is more critical, more than ever, that as many people come out to vote as possible. The reason for that is I don't know if any of you have been back to the US recently. I visited my family in Missouri, Ohio, and North Carolina for Thanksgiving last year. And I have to say, I saw more Trump 2024 flags than I'd ever seen. And it is very, very scary. Democracy is at risk, and we need more people to turn out to vote this year to keep Trump out in 2024. So please help us by registering to vote. And by the way, if your child is 17 and is turning 18 this year, they're also eligible to vote. Your children are eligible to vote if they're over 18. So we have a huge group of dedicated volunteers that will help you register to vote. All you need to do is go to votefromabroad.org to register to vote. We also have a support email, which someone will put it into the chat box. So if you have any questions at all about voting or registering to vote, please feel free to reach out. I think it's gotv@democratsabroad.org. And then if you have any questions around voting and taxes, because this is a big myth, a lot of people think that there is a connection between voting and taxes, and there isn't. There's completely no link with voting in federal elections. So you can vote for president, House, and Senate, and there's no problem with voting in those elections, and everybody should. So if you have any questions around voting and taxes, you can always email us on taxationtf@democratsabroad.org. Also, if you're not a member of Democrats Abroad, it's totally free to join. Just go to democratsabroad.org/join and you can register for free. Last few things I'll say is if you found this webinar useful, we would really super appreciate a donation. Just go to democratsabroad.org/donate. We're a volunteer-led organization. Nobody is paid. And we do all of this in our spare time. And we need funds for helping to run more webinars like this. So we'd really appreciate some kind of a donation if possible. And finally, if you are interested in helping to help out and volunteering, you can go to democratsabroad.org/TTF_volunteer to find out more about helping us out doing this really great work. And finally, we have our mailing list. So if you want to stay in the loop on our tax advocacy, tax events, and any tax updates and such, just go to democratsabroad.org/taxation and you can find out more information and sign up for the mailing list there. So now that my PSA is over, I'm going to hand it back over to Nathalie to take on the last 15 minutes we have on Q&A questions. So yeah, I guess you could just start at the top and work your way down.
Sounds good. I will stop screen sharing, right? So I think that's going to be easier.
Yeah.
And let's just get to it. So at what stage do minors, US citizens with a social security number, need to submit tax forms? That depends on how much income your minor makes. So again, if they have unearned income, so unearned income can be investment income, rental income, etc., things like that. You do have to start watching out when that unearned income goes over $1,100. So that's kind of the first flag. But if they don't have unearned income, if say maybe they're working part-time at a salary job or something like that, then they don't need to file a tax return until they hit the filing threshold that you are also subject to. So again, it's not necessarily about age, it's about how much money do they make, right? Again, the only exception to that is the FBAR, where if you're creating financial foreign accounts for them and you put their name on it, they may be subject to the FBAR requirement. So can or should tax returns for past years be amended if you get a CRBA and an SSN when they're older and you hadn't reported them as dependents at the time of filing? Unfortunately, you do need to have that social security number by the due date of their tax return. So you cannot amend prior tax returns if you just got a social security number for them. You can definitely claim them on your 2021 tax return, right? So your current year. Definitely get an extension if you haven't gotten that social security number already, so you have extra time. But you do have to have the social security number by the due date, including extensions of that tax return. So you cannot amend prior year tax returns to back claim a dependent if they did not have a social security number available. Now, if you if they did have a social security number by the due date of that tax return, you just didn't claim them, you can definitely amend those prior years. But the main thing is that their social security number needs to be valid by the due date of that tax return, including extension, and the IRS does check this. So can you talk more about filing as head of household versus filing married filing separately? If you are married to a non-US citizen, then you normally have two filing choices. It's married filing separately, assuming you don't want to put them on your US tax return, of course. If you put them on your US tax return, they get an ITIN and social security number, you can do married filing jointly. But assuming you don't want to put your non-US citizen spouse on your US tax return and you don't want to get them an ITIN or social security number, you normally have two choices. It's married filing separately, which is the most common, or head of household. Head of household means that you have a eligible dependent and you pay for more than half of the cost of keeping up that home. So if that is the case, you may be eligible for head of household, because if you're married to a non-resident alien spouse, then you're considered unmarried for the choice of having head of household as filing status. If you're unsure about this, you can go to MyExpatTaxes, just fill in your information. We actually help you determine that before you pay. Again, MyExpatTaxes, even if you don't choose to file with us, I want to stress out that we built this for expats because it's confusing, and a lot of the information you can get before you even pay. So you can actually go through, enter in your situation about your family, your marital status, and we'll help you determine if you qualify for married filing separately or head of household before you even have to pay anything. So, if you're curious about that, we have all the questions listed for you in that, in MyExpatTaxes. So if I previously filed with an American software, TurboTax, can I amend my tax return to remove 2555 and now claim my children retroactively? Of course you can, and we do this all the time. We always get tax returns coming in from TurboTax or, even other popular tax firms that quote unquote say that they're for expats. We get those tax returns in, we take a look at it and we go, this was really not the optimal approach. We'll help you revoke 2555 or even amend your prior tax return so that you never claim 2555 in the first place. And then we'll help you get the additional child tax credit. So you can definitely amend your prior year tax returns if it would have been an optimal choice for you. If you're unsure, like I said, you can always reach out to MyExpatTaxes. It's very quick for us to review a prior year tax return. So just, head over to us, team@myexpattaxes.com, say, I want to create an account just to have my prior year tax return reviewed. Someone will notify me or another senior tax professional will take a quick look and just tell you, hey, there's nothing to amend, or actually, yeah, there's something here we could probably do that's better. So earned income is a job and those type of wages. Yes, I receive dividends from my US company, but not a W-2 employee of that company. So my understanding is I'm not eligible for the tax credit, correct? And a little more additional information to that is, if it matters, I live in Germany, pay taxes on these dividends to the German tax authorities, and my first child was born in 2021. I had previously filed married filing separately, spouses and NRA, so non-resident alien spouse who earns foreign income but does not have to file a US tax return. But this year I should qualify as head of household. So earned income is essentially money you get as compensation for your services. And if they're dividends, normally they fall more into investment income, which is not earned income, right? At the end of the day, what you always kind of have to look at is sometimes you're categorized as having not necessarily salary from a US company because maybe they don't want to put your income as salary for Social Security, et cetera, things like that. So it really depends on if your dividends would have actually been, it should have been salary and you should have been a common law employee, but I think that gets really deep into it. My general answer here is dividend income is considered investment income. That's not really earned income. The one exception there could be that if you were really should have been a common law employee and that should have been salaried income, or it should have been self-employment income. So something to think about there. We can always answer your question a little bit more in depth if you reach out to us via email. Liz has a question. That was such a kind offer about looking quickly at our prior year taxes to see if we would have qualified for additional child tax credit. How would we get in touch with you about that? Again, you'll get the slide deck, so you'll get all the information, but you can just go to myexpattaxes.com. We have a live chat, or just team@myexpattaxes.com. Just reach out to us in any way you feel comfortable with, whether it's email, live chat, Facebook group, etc. We're always there. It's easy to find us. And then just let us know that you want us to look at your prior year returns, and our support team will help guide you through that process. Next question, can I claim for previous year's child tax credit, 2018 to 2020, if my child only obtained their social security number in 2022? Unfortunately not. Again, you need to have the social security number, a valid one, by the due date of that tax return. So the due date of your 2021 tax return is June 15, 2022, unless you extend it further. And so you need to have a social security number by the due date of your return. So of course, the prior year tax returns are no longer eligible because the social security number was not valid at the due date of those prior years. How would it have happened that I received the bank's transfer for the first stimulus check in 2020, but I didn't receive the more recent child tax credit in 2021? So if you got the stimulus payments, remember the stimulus payments are eligible the same amount for every US taxpayer, right? So if you filed a tax return, you were eligible for it based on your income, you had a social security number, then you probably got the stimulus payments regardless of your residency. Now the advanced child tax credits, that was really more for those that are living in the US, right? And I filed my tax return with a US address because it's just a lot more convenient for mail and everything else. So that's why I actually got the advanced child tax credit. So if you filed your tax return with a foreign address, that's probably why you didn't get the advanced child tax credits, but that doesn't mean you can't still claim it on your tax return. The normal process is not to get advanced child tax credits, it's to file your tax return and get the child tax credit at the time of filing. So in your case, Lisa, I would say, look to file your 2021 tax return. Hopefully you can e-file it, right? And see if you can claim the additional child tax credit on there, or now known as the refundable child tax credit. Gloria asks, can one claim child tax credits beyond 2018? So, I mean, you can claim child tax credits for 2018 to 2021, right? You cannot really do it for years prior to 2018 because, I mean, you could, but the IRS will not honor that refund because they only honor refunds for up to 3 years after the due date of that return. So I will say, I know we're hitting at time at the hard stop. So Rebecca, you can jump in whenever you want. I will take on, I guess, one more question, and otherwise, Rebecca, feel free to jump back on. So the next question is, I live in the UK 100% of the time, no US income, no US home, American citizen, have been filing 2555 for 15 years on modest earned income. Hadn't realized I'm missing out on the child tax credit, plan on claiming 2021 child tax credit, but also need to amend 2018 to 2020 with 1116. What documents do I need to amend those past 3-year returns? So the first part is, if you want to amend prior year tax returns, you can still do that. I do warn that you should do the 2018 ASAP because you have to do it and you have to mail it, right? You can't e-file, you have to mail it by the due date of that 3 years past the due date of their return, so by June 15. But the IRS is really sticky about this. So even if you mail it, they might think that it's still late, but you would need 1040X, 1116, you would need to have a statement saying that you're revoking 2555. And the second question is, if I ask MyExpatTaxes to do all 4 years, is it free? You said there's a do-it-yourself option, but in your do-it-yourself package, your website is 149 euros. So it's do-it-yourself is not free, unfortunately, because we still have to provide all the software for it. It is 149 euros to amend prior year tax return. So that's an option for you. Normally, when you're doing so many years, we'll stick you in the streamlining package. But if you don't want that, just reach out to our support team and tell us what you want. But essentially, if you want us to amend prior year tax returns for you, that's 149 euros. At the base fee. Of course, if you want extras, you want a tax professional to work with you through it, then it can be a little bit more expensive. So I end there. Rebecca, please take back the stage. And if I didn't get to your questions, I know I didn't get to a lot of them. I tried, but essentially, you can go to our Facebook group, myexpattaxes.com. You can just go to myexpattaxes.com itself, right? Make sure you go to MyExpatTaxes. We're the only MyExpatTaxes out there. I know that there's other filing softwares that claim to be us at this point, but that's just part of the way it works now when you get to a bigger company. So just reach out to us. We're always there. And, Rebecca will share up slides with all that information.
Yeah, I see a note about slowing down. I think what you can do is when you get the recording, you can go back and watch this part and you can actually slow it down you'll get a YouTube link and there's a feature where you can slow down the speech or speed it up or whatever. So again, you're going to get all the slides, you're going to get the recording. So you'll be able to remember and go back and watch certain things. But I wanted to survey everybody before we wrap up. Now that you've attended the webinar, now that you know more information, do you now know if you are eligible for the child tax credit? So let us know on the survey. It's the same thing as before. You go to menti.com and you put in the code And then maybe we could put the link to the survey into the chat box again, if that's okay. But hopefully you found this webinar useful. Hopefully you learned something new. I know that I sure did. And we're hoping that this was helpful for you to get a better understanding of how to register a birth abroad, how to get a social security number abroad, and then therefore file your tax return so that you can then get the child tax credit. Because one of the things that we've really noticed is that a lot of parents abroad don't even have any idea that they're eligible for this money. So we want to make sure that you're aware of this. And also on top of that, make sure that you are registering to vote in this year's US election. It is critical and important. So don't forget to go to votefromabroad.org and register to vote today as well. And it's interesting, we often see a correlation between people filing their tax return as well as people voting. I think that has something to do with people remaining engaged with the US while living abroad. So that's one of the reasons that we do this as well, but also for you to know about the tax code and other things. So yeah, with that, I think we have 1 more minute. And hopefully you've been able to submit your answer on if you're eligible. It looks like on the poll, most people are eligible, which is really great. And hopefully you'll be able to file and get that, get the child tax credit for this year and potentially back years as well, if you haven't been filing. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to close out and stop the webinar. But thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate you coming here, and we'll send an email follow-up so that you have the information and the recording. All right, thank you, everyone. Bye.